As artificial intelligence becomes increasingly embedded in our daily lives, education systems worldwide face the challenge of integrating AI in ways that empower rather than diminish student agency. A recent survey revealed that 88% of parents believed AI knowledge is crucial for their children's future, yet many are uncertain if schools are adequately addressing this need. So today, we're going to dive into how educators can navigate this landscape effectively. Joining us is Danny McCamlie, an expert in educational technology and AI integration. And Danny's dedicated his career to developing strategies that uphold student autonomy while embracing technological advancements in the classroom. Well, welcome to the International Classroom Podcast, proudly sponsored by Lumio by Smart Technologies. Lumio transforms your lessons into engaging, interactive experiences that enhance collaboration and student participation. You can bring your lessons to life effortlessly with Lumio, empowering teachers and inspiring learners. And Lumio really emphasizes collaboration. Speaking of that, let's get on with our episode. Danny, thank you ever so much for joining me on the International Classroom Podcast today. Whereabouts in the world do we find you?
Hi, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me on. I'm currently in Madagascar on the East Coast, where you might be able to hear the cyclone and tropical storm in the background hitting.
Well, there we go. This is a first for us here. So thank you again. Really appreciative, actually, of you taking the time to chat to us while you've got chaos going on around you. Very calm from there. Just to start off this conversation then, really curious about your journey and especially how you ended up in educational technology, and then specifically what led you to focus on AI integration in schools.
Yeah, sure. I think you've bigged me up and played me a little bit too highly there. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in educational technology. I would say that my background is much more in supporting low resource contexts. So my career has been centered around underprivileged schools, looking at low resource contexts in developing countries. So I spent a lot of time in Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America, Latin America. And through that journey and that experience, the digital divide was very large to start with. So if I throw back 10, 12 years ago to when I took my first posting overseas, I can remember working for an international school, walking in thinking, we're going to have, video provocation, we'll have follow-up discussion, and then ending with 35 students gathered around my laptop because there was no power, there was no screen, and this is at an international school. When I looked to then sort of move around the world and some of the context I found myself in with no Wi-Fi, social enterprises that I've operated, really the poignancy of access to the tools that a lot of people in the world take for granted becomes very powerful. That was really focused when this generative AI sort of trend hit education 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and looking at it as a huge opportunity to address some of the gaps in education. And then through experience and use and getting it out there with some of our teams and some of the learners that we were in contact with, realizing actually some of the weaknesses there, that if you are not critically minded, if you've not been taught to question or to think, the use of AI can be quite dangerous. And that took us down this path of, if we're looking at what does every learner need every time they engage with material around the world, it is that critical mindset, it is the sense of agency. And that is really a hot topic right now when it comes to AI.
Yeah, even more so because we filmed this today on February the 3rd, and obviously it will go out later on. But a lot of posts at the moment are going out about the EU Act that has really come into force today, and how that's going to have an implication into schools, education, how we use it, what we use. And I'm sure we will get into that in a little bit as we go through this conversation. But the thing I really want to start with regarding this is then about student agency, because you mentioned in there obviously about thinking. And one of the things, if you are following AI around enough and you go to conferences and you speak with people, one of the things that they always go on about, and I'm the same, is about critical thinking. So I want to start there in terms of how, from a human perspective, critical thinking is going to help students use AI as a tool rather than as a crutch.
Yeah, it's a good question, and you're right. I don't even think you need to go to a conference. You only need to scroll for a few moments on social media to see the kind of debate that it's triggering. But I would argue that the emergence of AI hasn't created any new educational challenges. What it's done is dramatically amplify some of the existing challenges we already faced. That critical thinking and that thinking skill that we're mentioning or alluding to there has been something we've been discussing for decades. We've been talking about the need for students to be critical thinkers, to be self-directed learners, to own their own journeys for years, and to evaluate the information that they use to guide that journey. But historically, what we looked at is the consequences of not developing those skills weren't immediate or obvious enough to drive any real change. They became sort of tag-ons to our education systems or what we would like to achieve, but the constraints of the system stop us from getting there. And sure, we've tried to give voice and choice on how students reach that potential, but they're limited by the books, by the educators in the room, by the websites, and these areas or sources of knowledge that we have a pretty good grasp on. When it comes to AI, we don't have so much of a grasp of that information. So it changes the stakes. Because now when a student doesn't think critically, they don't just risk being misinformed, they risk being systematically misled by a system that they don't even understand. And it's not just the students. When I say learners, I'm talking about everybody playing or exploring AI right now, including ourselves. And when we lack that self-direction in our learning, we're not just risking underachievement or underperformance, we risk becoming dependent on a tool that actually limits the intellectual growth. There's been quite a lot of sort of buzz around this kind of cognitive shedding or cognitive offloading that's happening, or that people suspect may be a end result of relying on AI. And when we look at that, there is obviously a question there and a problem, something that we should be looking to address. But I don't think the solution is something new either. When we talk about agency, when we talk about learning, there are skills we've always known that students need. Critical thinking, metacognition, ethical reasoning. I'm sure we'll touch on AI ethics later. But these are exactly what we kind of need to maintain the agency in an AI-rich world or in an AI-void world. The core skill is still critical thinking, ethical reasoning, metacognition, to be good human beings. The difference is just, as a system, we can no longer afford to pay lip service to those skills or treat them as nice to haves, because everybody has access to the AI. Everybody needs those skills. They're becoming survival skills, where the line between human and machine-generated content is so increasingly blurred, it is more commonplace to need those skills. So I don't think AI has changed what a good education looks like. It's just made the consequences of a poor education more immediate and visible. And that's where my work in some of those low-resource contexts has really highlighted the need for a level playing field or a critical thinking and agency there. So I think instead of seeing AI as this challenge to address, I think we need to see it as more of a catalyst that's going to push us to actually implement what we've been saying we will implement for decades now.
Yeah, it's that and you can see why teachers who have been at this for generations, or decades, should I say, have kind of looked at this with, not the rose-tinted sense of optimism, but almost I've been here before, I've seen these different fads, and, it will soon blow by and we'll be back to the typical, pen, paper on the board, whatever it may be. And they're right to, because to some extent, think about COVID. And we had that, and we had all this technology. It was all of a sudden opened out, and we had this concept of blended learning and being able to do this. And on however many years later, we're just, and nothing has really come about from it. And so I can understand the cynicism that people will also have regarding it. But there is something in there that you touched upon that I think even for the last few years, I got made more aware of, because it was a mission from my school principal at the time. And I was like, never really come across this. What is student agency? Because in the schools I'd worked at, it had never been something they currently pushed or was openly discussed. And I still think there's educators out there, which is going to lead to the question now, that are going, well, what is student agency? Because if I don't understand it now, how am I meant to use AI to help improve student agency? So from your perspective, what would you describe a student agency to be to the viewers and listeners?
I mean, it's a great question, and similar to yourself over the years, I don't think I've ever been in a staff meeting, a professional conversation, and had agreement in the room on what student agency was. I think quite often we say it's voice and choice in education to guide your own learning journey. And I think that captures what a lot of educators would take to mean by agency. And when we're looking at agency with an AI world, we're looking at if AI is making decisions on what I learn, when I learn, how I learn, where is my guidance on my learning journey? Where am I actually expressing my voice and choice? Can I recognize my voice or my choice over an AI? A great example, just to put it into real world context, would be a Spotify or a YouTube curated playlist. Now, I will go onto YouTube or Spotify. I know I'm looking for, I'm putting it in my playlist. I know when it's an AI suggested addition or not, and I choose to include it or to reject the offering from the system. But if you don't have a sense of agency and you just click DJ play whatever, that Spotify or YouTube playlist is now completely AI curated. Have you exercised voice and choice? Have you exercised agency over your listening preferences or your watching preferences? Or is it being determined for you?
Yeah, I think that's a really nice and simplistic way to describe it, the voice and choice. But I can't help but have in the back of my head that, well, how do students know what they need to learn? Because unfortunately, I work in a British education system and have had long and hard conversations and debates around the efficacy and the validity now of the current exam system that we sit in. But it is what it is. And you know, I think no matter what curriculum you would do, it's how do we ensure that students understand what they need to learn? But from that, the challenging part then is, how do teachers know? How do teachers go about ensuring that students get voice and choice, but also now they've got something else to learn about, that is the AI side of it? So it's almost, there's a lot of challenges with being able to develop this. I mean, am I right in thinking that, or is it more simpler than what I'm thinking it to be?
I would say you're right, but I would take the AI out of the equation and say if you're looking at a paradigm shift in education, you're always going to face those challenges. And what AI is showing us is amplifying the patterns that we already know. Then innovation in education is hard to achieve because whole school teacher efficacy and everyone pulling in the right direction, in the same direction, even if it's the wrong direction, but just to get everybody aligned on the same goal is often quite a challenge. And if you think about AI's impact here and you look at how maybe, for example, we've traditionally approached research skills. We focus on the mechanical aspects. Here's how you find a source. Here's how you cite it. But actually, very rarely do we step back and go, here's a deeper intellectual work of evaluation and synthesis. Is this a source you actually want to use, or is it just the first hit on Google? So now we've got students who see research, it's just a task to complete. It's an exam to tick. It's another building block on their predetermined race towards wherever their destination is. And they're collecting these quotes and these accolades without really engaging with the ideas. They're valuing the grades over the learning. And I think what we need to do with AI is actually, AI makes it impossible to ignore those gaps now. It makes it impossible to ignore the fact that students are grade chasing rather than process chasing. And when a student submits an AI-generated essay, and it's obvious they haven't engaged with material, that shouldn't be the student's fault. That's the system not empowering the student to actually care about the process or to own and to have agency over their own journey. That conversation is deeper and longer than AI's presence in our sector. But we need to recognize that it's a question we can no longer hide from. It's a question that's been there for ages, and it's time for us to answer it, because the absence of an answer is becoming more glaringly obvious in what we're seeing from students and learners.
Yeah, and I would also add into that, in my opinion, is it also makes, I would say, amplify the issues with education from a learning perspective, but I also think it amplifies the gaps in a teaching perspective, because obviously everything we're talking about there, and you've got this huge FOMO or all these different platforms, but going back to probably the key minutiae of what you said there is, you teach for pedagogy planning, and if the technology fits in, not just AI, if the technology supports or does something you can't do or takes you further, then use it. I think at the moment, depending on where you look or where you read, you're seeing a lot of use for the sake of use. Does it make your planning? And I said this at the weekend, and someone said, about, more efficient. And I said, no, I still plan the same amount of time. I still take the same amount of time to plan a lesson. And the difference is the content or the diversity of what I can add into my lesson based on my own pedagogical experiences is greater. But that doesn't mean my students are using AI. It just means that I'm using it to plan more, let's say, broader, more skills-based, more diverse activities that, had I had to think about it all on my own, would have taken me probably a whole day. But I think that's a really fascinating point in terms of what we make about, always back to like whether you're a TPAC model person, whether you're a SAMA model person, it's always about the teaching the human part first and the technology part if it works. Because what you're saying there kind of takes us into this part about ethics, about students, if they're going to hand in an AI created, crafted essay, then obviously they've not been taught anything about AI ethics. And one of the key things we really want to focus on this is about age-appropriate AI ethics. So from your side, like, what does effective age-appropriate AI ethics in education look like in practice?
Before answering that, I will just go back one step. And,
please.
Just sort of address that, yes, there is a FOMO from educators right now, and there's that pressure of everybody kind of in this, but next door is using X tech. And I don't think we should be feeling guilty about that. And I don't think we should be feeling shamed or pressured to be using AI or to be keeping up in this race right now. I was talking with some colleagues recently, and I likened it to the fashion world. I said, if you want to keep track of fashion and you were then going to catwalks and fashion shows every week and trying on the latest cutting edge stuff, you would never actually be fashionable walking down the high street, but you'd be spending so much time keeping abreast of those latest trends. And actually, as educators, if you just step out of the silo of what's happening in my room and take the big picture view, you say, what is everybody using? What is actually showing that it's effective because it's becoming ingrained in our practice? Where can I use it because I have the expertise in, I'm looking for a diversity of ideas in my lesson plan, but I'm still going to lesson plan the same way. And take some of that pressure off ourselves. It's not about finding the latest tool and keeping up the latest trends. It's about leveraging tools to be better at connecting with humans. A fire helped us stay up late to tell stories to each other. AI helps us share ideas across disciplines. It doesn't mean that your discipline is worth any less.
Quote. There we go. That's going to be that's the title of the episode. There we go. There's right there. That's a soundbite right there. Thank you. Yeah, that's
your question about the AI ethics. I think it feeds into that a similar answer. When we're asking about age-appropriate AI ethics, I think we're jumping ahead a little bit, because actually what that highlights is a much more fundamental gap in education. Because if we're honest, I don't think I've ever seen a deliberate, intentional ethics system that is vertically aligned, horizontally taught, so that kids actually study and learn ethics as a subject rather than AI ethics, just ethics in general. We just assume kids will absorb it through, our profile of a learner, our portrait of a learner. It will come through our class discussions or our literature reviews. We might touch on moral questions in book studies. We might briefly discuss research ethics in science, but it's usually peripheral to our center aim or our learning objective or our learning outcome of the day or the unit. And we operate under this strange assumption that, well, ethics is there because it's part of what we're doing. But we wouldn't do the same with any other part of our discipline. So why are we doing that with ethics? Something that we're actually now saying we value more. And if we're valuing it more, I think rather than worrying about AI ethics, we should be focused on actually teaching ethics. And AI, again, is just a catalyst that's forcing us to confront that gap. Because suddenly we're all scrambling of what do we do with ethics in AI? But you can't teach AI ethics in isolation, just like we can't teach ethics in isolation. But what we can do is bring them visibly there. The questions of fairness, bias that's coming through in a lot of the data training, or the responsibility of different stakeholders to use or to lead, the power that it gives someone that's got some form of mastery or experience with it. These aren't AI-specific questions. AI is just making them more urgent and more visible. So I think the answer to the question of what is age-appropriate ethics education is the same answer to what is age-appropriate ethics education. And that's at the younger ages, we need to start with the basic concepts of fairness, equality, equity, kindness, what you expect to see when you walk into a lower elementary school room or classroom or environment, and you do in most cases. What we need to do now is pull that up and make sure that vertically it stays all the way through, and we deepen those conceptual understandings of how does it apply to real world situations, how does it apply to ethics, how do we overlay this on politics, news, social media, and all other challenges that our learners are faced with every day.
Yeah, you make a really interesting point, and I'm thinking about this myself and going, before AI, would I have taught or discussed with my class, and I'm a science teacher, so how often would I talk about ethics? And I, because of the subject I teach, have on the odd occasion it will come up. But other than that, I wouldn't give it a thought. I only really think about morals and ethics if I teach like moral and social studies, and occasionally think about those things. But unless I was a philosophy teacher, or unless I wanted to do an enrichment program that incorporated components of philosophy, the thought of ethics or embedding ethics vertically, horizontally into any curriculum, scheme of work, or mapping would never have been there. So it just reinforces the point that you're making here about the spotlight that AI is shining on. I'm going to use the word inadequacies to some extent, but the gaps in the curriculums that we teach. And this is a global thing. It's not just, hey, it's the GCSEs or it's the IBs or the other curriculums are out there. It's as a whole. There's probably gaps in this as well. So let's remove AI from the question. What could be a solution to this? How do we go about incorporating some of these important skills like ethics into our curriculum so it's not just shoehorned in, but more, as we say, embedded, interdisciplinary, cross silos, whichever term we use? What could we be doing to ensure that we can smoothly embed those things?
I think that is the key question we're facing as an industry and as a sector and as a part of society right now. And when we kind of started unpacking that, what we looked at was, I'm a father, I know you are yourself. What do I want for my son when he leaves education in this modern world? What do I want for the learners in my care? What do we want to see for a generation? When I'm retired as an old man, what do I want to look around me and see as the leaders there? Do I want them to be really good at applying quadratic equations to real world situations or writing research? Or do I want them to be good people? And I really want them to be good people. Like that is my main drive. And I think when we look at education, what we need to start looking at is, are we nurturing the growth of good people? Good people that also have skills that they can apply to do good with. If we've got good people as the priority, that they conceptually understand what it means to be a good person, good to themselves, good to society, good to the spaces around them, and good for the sustainability of the earth, we're going to have a much more positive step in the right direction. So focusing on those four pillars, I think, is our first step, that we want to make sure that our learners are good to themselves, good to members of society, good to the spaces they occupy and the spaces around them, the spaces we've not even explored yet, because this is a generation now that may well see, space exploration expanding as a venture. And sustainability of our planet, we're facing a lot of issues there. What's the sustainability of business models and technology now? And if we start framing those questions vertically and horizontally, okay, we are still studying the core disciplinary concepts in my maths class or in my history class. But now we're going to look at how that impacts your ability to be a good person in the context to yourself or to others. We start moving more towards ethical understanding that we have a responsibility to ourselves, to others, to the planet, to the future of the future generations. So I think in answer to We want to reframe all of education around not what can I do with the skills, but what do the skills enable me to do to make this world better?
So let's pose the challenge question here, because we're getting to a point where maybe we're bringing and allowing educators to potentially bring in their own beliefs and their own values. I'm not saying that we don't already to some extent, but are we, by doing this, could we potentially be going down a bit of a tightrope where you have got teachers or educators around the world with certain values, certain beliefs, and therefore when we get to this idea of ethics, morals, and the amount of time these adults potentially spend with children, our children throughout the day, could some of those then that maybe I don't agree with, or I don't want being put onto my child, is there a risk there?
I think it's the same risk we face right now, possibly more so, with a lower or with a reduced access to information. You are more susceptible to the voice of the adult in the room. With greater access to information, you are less susceptible to the exploitation of your opinion, because you can draw on other viewpoints and arguments. The key is making sure that our learners are able to differentiate opinions from fact and to critique those influences on their lives. But if I look at some of the under-resourced areas that I've been working with in recent years, and the teacher is still the gatekeeper to all knowledge. There are no books in the room. So forget AI. We have the teacher textbook, the educator standing as a sage on a stage, and no questions are welcome or desired. And that person has a significantly higher amount of power and responsibility over those learners than in a different context where those learners have internet access, a range of reading material, and then the teacher's potential biases and opinions. And I think that leads into, as we are diverging off of AI, to bring it back into AI with this conversation about the biases and the stereotypes that are inherent in AI. And I think what we need to remember is that AI has been trained on data generated by human beings. Now, if I have a human being in the room with a learner, and that human being has a strong opinion, that is the only data that student has access to. Whereas an AI system, or the ability to cross-reference, you're going to get maybe bias, but you'll get different biases or conflicting biases that you can then start realizing that doesn't connect with what this says. I'm going to question. It's naturally going to trigger curiosity. Whereas having an opinion that's all aligned is never going to cause you to question.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really good answer. And the questioning line, we went with it. But the concept of diversity science, I think, is really something that stands out in this. And the idea that we want students moving forward and adults, teachers, to be curious. And the only way to sometimes get curiosity is to have a differing of opinions and a differing of ideas and values to some extent to draw out conversation. Otherwise, unfortunately, and this is only my opinion, we will continue in a generation where people feel it's acceptable to throw cans of paint at pieces of work or sit and protest because they're not willing to participate in a conversation and learn to see other people's sides and points of view. I think it's really important to challenge that. And AI is one tool in which we can utilize to help with that. So, it's about the skills. And even if it's just a small thing, it's going down and continuing on that pathway to be able to do it. But one of the things that, again, is currently probably doing the rounds when it comes to terminologies within AI is this idea of AI literacy, or some people might call it AI fluency. Some people don't call it that at all. It's digital literacy, digital fluency, but to really focus in the area we want to talk about, which is AI literacy. Like, when I say that to you, what does AI literacy mean to you, Danny?
I like the way you frame that question, because I think it reveals how overcomplicated we are making this. If you boil down to what AI is, it's a computer programming. It's a way to code that replicates human output. It's there to mimic or to copy what a human might be able to do at various levels. So it could be very sophisticated and be a large language model that can replicate the way I would write or speak. It could be as simple as just knowing what I would hit on play next. But when we boil it down to, it's trying to predict what a human would do and copy that. So being literacy is just being able to identify, when is that happening? How is it happening? Why is it happening? And I think that's what really we boil down when we're saying AI literacy. And when I talk about AI literacy, the framework that we created to help support educators to deliver AI literacy was focused around, can you identify when AI is at play, how it's doing that, why it's doing it, and what that actually means to you?
So let's look at that then in the context of the classroom. So for me, let's say general teaching here, we can pick out any subject that we want. Are there specific strategies that I can use or ways I can use to help blend this into my current curriculum rather than it seem kind of like, I use the word shoehorn, but kids are pretty good at recognizing when you just shoehorn something into a lesson for the sake of it. Another tick box there, sir. Yeah. Is there a way in which we Yeah. So you ask me about this. Yes, I'm going to ask you about generative AI. No,
everything's on the test. If I taught it, it's there.
Yeah. How do I do it? What would you be recommending to me so that I'm not like going, oh, geez, as someone said to me the other day, you've added it to the cart. That was the best way I can describe it. When we bring these things in, add it to the cart because it's just another thing that we're giving to teachers. Is there a way we can make this super, super simple? And before we continue with today's episode, I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Lumio by Smart Technologies. Now imagine turning your standard lessons into dynamic, interactive experiences where every student is fully engaged. And Lumio lets you effortlessly blend videos, interactive quizzes, collaborative activities, and real-time feedback directly on student devices. Now, as educators, we love tools that make our jobs easier and learning more impactful, and Lumio does exactly that. You can check out Lumio and start transforming your classroom today by heading to lum.io, or you can click in the link in our show notes. Now, back to the episode.
Yeah, I think it's already in the cart and it's been there the entire time. It's just Gen AI and it's some boom and popularity is making us go, oh, this must be something fancy. But actually, we've had AI for a long time, just a much lower advancement than what we currently have. So if we take, you're a science teacher, so if we take a science lesson and we're just doing simple biology and we're talking about, we're modeling the nervous system. We're in an upper elementary where we're modeling nervous system, the way the brain receives and sends messages and your senses interpret that data to then make decisions on how you're going to respond. Well, that's an AI network getting in input, processing it, and output. So we can start looking very quickly at, it's not, the underlying processes or thinking processes aren't new. It's just the lens we put over it. I don't think there are many, if any, AI experts that are also in a position to teach a course on AI to learners across the ages. Instead, it actually needs us to all recognize that it's in all of our carts already. So in humanities, we should already be teaching students to think critically about sources, to understand bias, to consider different perspectives. Well, that's the exact same skills we're going to need to evaluate AI outputs. It's not new content. It's not new concept. It's just a new context to apply. So if you want to look at the point of all learning is the transfer of that learning. Well, I've taught it in here. Now we're going to apply it to this AI. The same way that ethics has always been in our cart. We've just never pulled it out and flaunted it too often. It's kind of buried at the bottom somewhere. So when we talk about incorporating AI literacy, we're not talking about bringing something new in. We're talking about making visible the connections that already exist. So instead of cramming in more content, it's helping students to see that the thinking skills they should already be developing can apply to this new context. So the challenge then gets reframed a little bit, and it's not, can we find space in the curriculum? It's a shift of our perspective of where is it already in my curriculum? Where is it a natural extension in the discussion of what I'm already teaching? We know that connecting to the real world is more efficient to get learners to engage and to find it meaningful. AI is the real world right now. So let's frame it that way. And that integration becomes manageable and meaningful.
Yeah, I think that's a really useful way to look at it, actually, because another one, you could just just keep throwing them out there. It's great. It's a really, really useful way to look at it, actually, because I think also one of the challenges we faced for years is students recognizing that the skills, not just knowledge as well, but the skills they learn within school is transferable. The amount of times from science going into maths or to geography or to, even art, and they're like, oh, so why are we learning about art today in science? It's like, that's always my student voice, by the way. Oh, so it's like Kevin from Kevin and Perry. And it's like, there's a crossover, and the students themselves fail to see the transferable, this cross silo, this interdisciplinary connection. They don't see it. They see it all as very individual things. And why is maths in science? Or I hate maths. I just want to, and then the other parts is like, oh, it's just geography. Why and it's like, no, the relevance and the connection and, your ability to learn breadth and then be able to go depth for each of these things and pull them together is really, really important. But it's the problem of getting them to see it, whereas we as staff struggle with it still in terms of being able to go, hey, this is transferable, guys. And you would have done this in geography. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. How do you know that? I don't get a chance to speak to the geography teachers and see their curriculum and what they're doing. That's an age-old problem. It's nothing new about this. But you're right. I really like that. And it's how I've started looking at my curriculum is what is it I already teach and how do I transfer it into maybe a citizenship task? So they're learning about these different values of the type of people they want to be. Okay, well, how do I use this and think about, critical thinking or character? Or, how do I get them to collaborate? Or, so you can be upskilling students without having to, wave a magic wand over your curriculum, completely upheave it and throw it out and bring all these new things in. It's things we've known for a while, and you made this point earlier. It's things we've known for a while that we should always be doing, and we're still not doing them.
Yeah, and I think you pointed it out amazingly there. Just to unpack your response a little bit, when you talk about the students not being able to see the connections between, but how often do you hear the educator say, my standards are, whoa, they are not the educator's standards. That is ownership of your discipline. You're putting yourself in a box. Instead of going, the learner's standards are, and at some point over the course of X period of time, we're going to hope to see the learners progress through. And one of the earliest sort of explorations, experiments we did with AI was actually to take 4 or 5 very sort of disconnected, traditionally disconnected subjects. So we have music, sports, tech, English language arts, social studies, and maths. And we just connected them using AI, going, this is the unit. It's going to be inclusivity. We're going to look at, what is the role of the individual in societies to be more inclusive. It was kind of inquiry-based, and we looked at what we kind of trying to map was the music teacher is not going to teach music. They're going to teach science. So they're going to teach sound waves for how people that have hearing challenges will be able to feel sound using sound waves. So it's connected to that curriculum. It will tie in. And we started bouncing around these ideas. And in PE, you're looking at adaptive tech to help support PE rather than a PE core standard. You're going to address somebody else's standard. But because everybody was addressing somebody else's standards, the students got that breadth of knowledge we're talking about. They could see the connections. The educators suddenly went, wow, I never realized I was teaching science. I'm the music teacher. I never realized I was teaching social studies. I'm the PE teacher. Yeah, you are. You're doing it naturally without knowing it. And we actually just need to show it. And AI helped us to be that connection because we was looking at how's AI going to impact inclusivity in society? We need everyone, all hands on deck. Let's explore this. Remove that pressure. Okay, it's not my standards I've got to worry about. It's just the learner standards. AI is telling me what I'm going to teach. Off I go. We're connecting. And once we get educators to realize and to recognize that the world is connected, we are all recognizing it needs to be taught. And I think one of the fear factors around AI literacy in education is it going to become part of my standards? Is it coming onto my workload? Because it's not currently in a box anywhere. So it's the hot potato being passed around. We know it needs to be unwrapped. We know it needs to be taught. But whose workload is it going on? Well, let's reframe that perspective that the students are going to need this, the learners are going to need this, and it's our collective responsibility to grow good human beings, to nurture good human beings for the future. Humans that are going to engage with AI.
Yeah. And that brings us nicely into the kind of the challenge that we face at the moment when you talk about whose workload and how, is like, we need to also identify what's the difference between teaching students AI literacy, we mentioned that, and the difference that is about teaching students how to use AI tools. And I think there is a discrepancy between that, because as we've already established, I can teach AI ethics or AI literacy and all these without even touching AI. Like, it's the skills to some extent. But within those skills, somewhere has to be about learning how to use certain tools. What would you say is the distinction then? And why is that distinction important?
I think the distinction there boils down to the tool is the contextual application of the literacy. So if you look at, if we take it into something that we'd all be familiar with, the purpose of an author. What is the author's purpose in publishing whatever text? Now, the author could have used a PowerPoint to push that point. They could have wrote a piece of prose. They could have given an infographic. They could have got up and done a speech. Now, we will teach you how to use a PowerPoint to make your point. PowerPoint to make your point, that works. We will teach you how to get your point across in a speech. We will teach you how to get your point across using an infographic. What we're actually teaching is how to get your point across. And we're doing that in these different concepts with these different tools. And along the way, you're going to learn how to use a bit of PowerPoint, how to use a bit of slides, other software exists. You're going to learn how to do a speech in front of your peers, in front of parent communities, and in front of other stakeholders. But what we're actually teaching is that concept of how to get your point of view across. And I think it's the same with AI literacy. If we're looking at AI literacy and we're looking at, can you identify what the purpose of the AI is in this context and how it may influence your decision? That could be when I'm looking at a piece of AI-generated art or poetry. It could be when I'm looking at a AI-curated news feed. It could be when I'm looking at an AI-created article that's pretending to be factual, or it might not be pretending to be. It is factual according to the training data of the AI. And so the core concept there is identifying what is there. The tools are you going to use a GPT to produce the article? Are you going to use an art producer? I don't want to name various softwares because by the time this goes out, they'll probably be efficient. It's moving that fast. Yeah. But the idea is, if we're teaching you the concept of getting your point across or thinking critically, that can be applied to any of the tools. And in using the tool to hone that point, you are naturally going to learn how to use some of the tools. But the use of a tool is not what we're looking to transfer. Using a Casio calculator is not the transfer skill to a different brand of calculator. It's the inputs that you are putting into a calculator rather than how to use a specific calculator.
I can't use a Casio calculator. It seems to be the one recommended, and you get it in science. I'm like, I have no idea.
Yeah, that's the way it comes to my mind. That's the one I can't use as well. I always sit at the back of it looking for the buttons.
Yeah, but that does raise the interesting point, and it's one of which we are going to find ourselves really struggling and grasping with about what platforms should we be using, because there are so many, aren't there? You just said there are new ones coming out, even with, think about now, obviously with China's launch and the possibility for the cost of it, that these platforms and these other areas of the world that couldn't once afford it might now be able to, because we can use a cheaper platform to be able to generate this information. It begs the question then about this whole concept of data privacy, the EU laws that have come out, things like Perplexity that I would have said I was great for research, and now all of a sudden everyone's saying actually what they're harvesting and what they're taking from you shouldn't really be using it. It's a minefield. I think that is the best way I can describe this at the moment, is a minefield. And is there, and again, it's that conceptual versus practical. At what point do we kind of go, look, conceptual is good, we want to teach you the skills, but at some point we've got to nail our flag to the mast and go, look, we're going to use Gemini, and some schools are going Google. Some schools are going to go, right, we're just going to stick with Magic School or these other ones that are ring fenced and kind of safe in that respect. At what point do you think it's important for schools or practitioners to be able to go, no, we do need some practical application, and we're just going to use this platform or these couple of platforms? Is it important, do you think?
Contextually important. So, I mean, you mentioned the EU guidelines. It's a great example. And they are obviously a hot topic right now for all schools that are going to be impacted. But a very similar school in a very different context, if we look at Japan or Australia or the Middle East, even, that has a very different set of guidelines or a different set of guidelines, is going to respond very differently to the pressures on them. And I think schools in their own context need to make that judgment call. But I would liken the conversation to, we're looking at the privacy agreements of AI, and I think that's a fantastic step in the right direction, because we've never read the privacy agreements on our iPhones or our Android phones. Like you go on the Play Store or the App Store and you're constantly downloading stuff. Yes, I agree. Yes, I agree. I signed up for this Riverside. Yes, I agree. I don't know what data is collecting. I didn't read the terms and conditions, but we go into AI and suddenly we're worried about it. And I think it's coming back round to some of those earlier conversations we had about sort of our long-term educational goals and societal goals. We're talking about agency again. We want people to know how to use the tools, or do we want them to understand well enough to decide how, when, and whether they should use them at all? And that's an agency. That's expressing your agency. Yes, I know it's going to collect my data, but I consider that cost worthwhile, or I don't. But I need to know that, and I need to be able to evaluate that myself to express agency. So do we want students who can operate within the AI-driven world? Yes. But do we also want students who can shape what that world becomes? Absolutely. Do we want someone to be able to use an iPhone or use Gemini or Claude or whatever? Yes. But we also want to make sure that they can drive those discussions and they can move it forward. And I think if you had the freedom of choice as an educational establishment, you would be doing a disservice to your learners if you went with a single track platform, because then you are limiting yourself down to that's the exposure those students and those learners will have.
It takes us all.
Whereas in such an evolving field, we want the different perspectives coming in.
Takes us all the way back to agency, doesn't it? Students are going to have voice and choice about what they want to use. It's the same as, do you want a MacBook or do you want a PC? It's, these questions will always be there in life for them, and the same as the choice of what platforms we use or don't use, as it were. And, it's going to be an interesting one for them moving forward with this. I want to move this on then, because we have a quick fire round. One of the things that we've introduced this season, moving into 2025 as well, as a quick fire round. So yeah, you've done your research and you're ready for this. You warmed up. I never asked actually with these monsoons and these storms that you have. Is it generally a cold one or is it a warm one?
Oh no, it's the temperature doesn't change. It's either hot and wet or it's hot and dry. Okay,
so either way, you're going to be hot either way. So we're all good. We're all good in that respect. Okay, we will kick these things off. Right, Danny, a common misconception about AI in education.
That you need to know about AI specifically to teach AI literacy.
Yep, I agree with that's a good one. I'm thinking myself about how much do I know about it? And I'm like, I don't know how it works. And I think that's always that's a good okay, yes. I can see how this one's going to go.
Because we've got to recognize what we come back to previously. We don't need to put pressure on ourselves to be the expert in the room, because we are no longer the gatekeepers of knowledge. We are facilitators of discussion.
Good, another soundbite. Just keep throwing them out there, Danny. We love this. Right. Can you recommend a resource for teachers looking to integrate AI literacy into their classrooms?
Their own curriculums. Through an interdisciplinary lens, if you looked at your own curriculum in detail and maybe applied a frame, whether that's be the UNESCO guidance, the DNA creative framework we published, or a frame that your school's adopted, you should be able to start with your own curriculum to see the links that are already there.
An opportunity for a shameless plug, and you just,
I thought it was subtle. I was trying to be subtle. I linked up with UNESCO as well.
I was going to touch upon your, altruism there. Like you have this framework, and yet you're happily just going, "Hey, there's some great, there's these great things out there, guys. There's this one. Oh, yeah, there's this one as well, which we've done, and there's this, and this." It's like, right, we'll pause on this one. Tell us a little bit about the framework that you have, Danny.
No, it's okay. I wouldn't want to toot my own trumpet too much.
You are allowed to do this because people out there might find it of great value.
What we actually did was we looked at the UNESCO guidance for learners and the UNESCO guidance for educators that come out, and we went, this is amazing. It's very well timed. It's exactly what we're looking for. And then we went, well, wait, what do we do with this? How do we use it? It stops short of, and this is how you do it in a classroom. But that's the bit I'm missing, and that's the bit I want. That's probably not, we're probably not the only ones saying that. So we sat down and worked with some great minds from all across different fields, from people that are coding AI through to ethics professors, through to inclusivity advocates. And so let's unpack this and what are kind of our framing questions? What are some of the key concepts here? And how do we actually make this connect to a broad range of curricula and contexts? And we used AI to help us do that.
And we will link it in the description notes as well, so people can go and access it and find it from there. So there we go. You're doing good work, great things, and people deserve to know about it. So don't be too hard on yourself about that one. And last one. What is one piece of advice you would give to educators hesitant about incorporating AI into their teaching?
No one is an expert until you are a novice, and AI isn't going anywhere. So be part of the conversation, or to be part of the conversation, it's time to join that conversation.
No one is an expert until you become a novice. How Sun Tzu of you over there. That's the only one I could think of at the moment. Like any of the sort of wise.
It is. I want to claim it as a Danny original, but I may well have stolen it somewhere. The best ideas are normally old ideas, right?
Well, as I read today, as someone put onto theirs, I can't think who it was on social media. It's like if no one's trying to steal or copy or impersonate your ideas, maybe they're just not as good as you thought they were. That was it. James Smith, that was it. Someone had posted James Smith, I think it was. And I thought, that's a fair enough point, actually. So there we go. Must be a good enough one.
And I like the way you stole the idea to elevate your podcast with a soundbite.
There we go. I am just taking what you're giving me. That's all it is. Right, we are wrapping this one up as well, because it's just been a wonderful conversation, really, about exploring these things that are really, I don't think they're going to go anywhere. They're prevalent, they're pertinent, and things that, as educators wanting to develop good humans, best versions of self. Love that one. Best versions of self who can be kind and caring, empathetic as well. For people who have got through this entire conversation, what would you want the listeners to take away and remember about this conversation, especially when it comes to students in the age of AI?
It's a great question. Model the curiosity that you're preaching to the learners. This is such a great opportunity for us to make those portraits of a learner and those learner profiles and whatever you're taking as your school values, to actually model and show them that they're gonna include curiosity. So actually be curious, lead that conversation by showing what you're telling the learners you want to see, and be a good human with it.
I love that. You're like the educational Ted Lasso, Danny. That's how I'm gonna call it. And for those of you that don't know, go and watch some Ted Lasso. You'll see what I mean. All right, Danny.
Including me, I'm going to go Google Ted Lasso.
What? You've never seen the Ted Lasso? Whoa, I'm missing out. There we go. There's some binge watching for you. I'm not going to spoil it at all. There's an amazing scene in it. Lots of amazing scenes.
There's 24 hours of cyclone lockdown.
That's it. You'll get through the whole thing. It's 3 seasons. You'll be golden. I can't wait to hear some messages back from you then about it. We will again wrap this up. I really, really appreciate you coming on, spending the time and talking to us, and just giving us a different. I'm going to say different viewpoint. But it's a really, really pertinent one, and one that we should be all taking on board from a leadership down and teachers into our own classrooms and working with students of all ages in terms of the types of things we can do, that not just AI, but obviously, as we said, how do we make good humans? And I think that's a really good question to leave people with, because we don't have the answers, and we know we have a tool that's there that can help us. But if we all started to think that way about how do we make good humans, then our education system moving forward, with all the other things we need to bring in, we'll be in good hands. So, Danny, thank you for weathering the storm today for us and taking the time to come and join us. Really, really appreciate it. So, thank you ever so much.
It's been a pleasure, Alex. Thank you very much.
Thanks again to Lumia by Smart Technologies, our podcast sponsor. You can transform your classroom into an interactive, student-centered learning environment today. Visit aliwem.io to find out how.